Today I'm speaking with Kaitlin Shetler. Kaitlin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been looking forward to speaking with you for a long time, and it's a real honor to speak with you. And for anyone that doesn't know Kaitlin, Kaitlin lives up in Nashville, Tennessee, not too far from me here down in Atlanta, Georgia. Kaitlin has a master's in social work from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and she uses it. She's a social worker for a nonprofit, and she's also a writer, focusing mostly on poetry. And she's a founding member of the Hysterical Hen Brigade, which we'll ask about in a second. She also has her primary platform on Facebook. I have the link beneath the video. Please go check it out. She's also on Instagram, and she will be on TikTok, except she keeps on getting kicked off.
I
so,
do.
so if you could start by telling us what is the Hysterical Hen Brigade, and then tell us more about yourself.
Yes, so the Hysterical Hin Brigade came a couple years ago after a poem that I wrote, and somebody commented on it. And I typically have a lot of people who are very kind when they comment on my stuff. But I have a faction of people who continue to read instead of unfollow. And because they read instead of unfollow, they are encouraged to write some pretty nasty things sometimes. And so on this particular poem, they had said some pretty negative stuff. And I had a lot of people who follow my page respond supporting me. And this person got upset about that and then responded saying that I needed to stop sending my hysterical hen brigade in to back me up. And so that just sort of stuck. And here we are.
That's an awesome story. And before we get started with your main story, could you tell us any other hobbies or aspirations you might have?
Yes. So I haven't had tons of time to like nurture my hobbies or my aspirations, especially like in the past few years. But one secret one that is no longer secret because I am saying this out to the YouTube, is learning how to play the violin. So I am like the least musical person in the world. I think it is going to be very difficult, but I am very committed. I would love to learn how to play the violin.
Mm, I love it. I'm jealous too. I want to go down the same path because I'm working on some kids songs, but I think it'd be better. They're right now they're just a cappella, which is not that great of a thing. But a little accompaniment will be a good thing. So I'm gonna try to do the same
Yeah.
thing with the guitar and piano. And at this point, we'd love to pass the ball to you to just kind of share your story. We always like to invite people to start at the earliest days, kind of where did your worldview start, and how did it evolve from there? And I'll jump in with some questions from time to time.
Thank you for asking me to come in. I'm really excited to talk about this. I guess I will begin from the very beginning. I'm an only child who was born into a military family. So my dad was in the Air Force and was throughout my whole growing up experience. He spent 25 years in the Air Force and he was an officer. And so we moved around a lot. And that sort of plays in to my experience as well, because I had a lot of experiences like being the new kid, um trying to find a community, and our faith really impacted like the types of people that we were around growing up. And so I lived in, we moved about 7 times before I went to college. And through those experiences, um, I got to know a lot of different people and I got to be a part of a lot of different churches. And church was the main culture, it was the main event for my family. It was a little different than in the military, and in the Air Force. A lot of time Air Force families made their community on base, um, going to different events with whoever your dad or your mom worked with in the families on base, and we would live on base. And so if you didn't find your community there, then you found your community in the church. And that was sort of where our family decided to put all of our energy into. I was born, my dad came from a very devout Christian family. My mom came from a very devout Christian family. They both met at Lipscomb University, which was and still is a Church of Christ affiliated university. My dad was many generations back Church of Christ. My mom, her mom and dad had, her mom had converted to Church of Christ. And so growing up, that was their context. And so they met at Lipscomb. They got married. They moved to California. They worked at a Church of Christ school before my dad went into the military. And so he joined the Air Force. They were stationed in Oklahoma, and that's when they had me.
I was just curious, real quick, to break in. The Church of Christ, what are the distinctives on that? Because I've heard of the denomination, but I don't know what they stand for, so to speak.
Yes. So they are distinctive in the fact that if you ask most Church of Christ people, they would say they are not a denomination. They are just a church. They are just the one true church. And that is what you will hear, especially Church of Christ. It has a long history. They are from the Restoration movement and the Stone Campbell movement. And they broke off, I think, although I'll have Church of Christ historians probably in the comments telling me that I'm wrong about this, but I think it broke away from the Baptists, maybe.
Okay.
But Stone Campbell just looked around and saw that churches were too concerned with power. This is a very, I think, kind take from me, but I think initially they looked at it and they thought that churches were too concerned with power. They were too concerned with like organizational stuff. And he said, really, we're just Christians. And that was sort of where the movement came from. We're just Christians. You should be able to read Jesus's words in the Bible and become a Christian and not have to be, Episcopalian or Catholic or Baptist or anything. You should just be Christian. And so we want to restore the one true church to what it was meant to be in Jesus's time. And so the idea behind that is we're going to strip away everything and we're just going to take what the Bible says. We're going to put the Bible kind of on the pedestal. All churches within this movement are going to be autonomous. We're going to be our own church. We're not going to be governed by a body. We're Bible, it's back to the Bible. We're biblically based. So if it says to do it in the Bible, we're going to do it. And that is the pattern. And if we can follow that pattern, we know we are golden, right? Like we're going to get to heaven because there you can't go wrong if you follow the Bible exactly as it's written. And so these churches sort of popped up, within the Restoration movement, the Church of Christ. And if you went to a Church of Christ, you sort of knew what to expect. We're Bible only. It's led by a preacher. Well, it's the sermons are given by a preacher, but it's led by elders and deacons. And so you sort of see this coming out of like Paul's instructions for what a church looks like. And so there are no instruments in the Bible. Well, there are instruments in the Bible, but there are no instruments in the New Testament. And so all of our services now have to be a cappella. And so we have to make sure that, and so you can kind of see, if you look back in the church history or the history of the Church of Christ, it starts from this idea of we are Christians only. And it sort of develops into this movement of we are the only Christians. And so it developed, and I'm sure somebody else could tell you how, but it got to be, I think it was like in the 50s or 60s where the movement was sort of at its height. Churches of Christ are very, very prevalent. Like, I'm in Nashville, and I feel like Nashville is the hub for the Church of Christ. You'll find one on every corner. You go somewhere like Hawaii, because I lived in Hawaii for a little bit, we had like 2 Churches of Christ on Oahu, which for as many people as went, you would think there would just be one, but the Church of Christ is also very well known for its division, because what happens, because they are autonomous, right? If they're reading the Bible and reading what they think the church should be, if somebody steps out of that, they're outside of what God's plan is. And so usually what will happen is then there'll be a church split. And so it's the most non-denominational denomination that I know of. I think if I were being ungenerous, I would say it acts a lot like a lot of cults that we would see. And I can get into that a little bit more about how that manifests, I think, throughout my experience. And I think that probably is a ungenerous take if you are still in the Church of Christ. But I think for a lot of people who have left the Church of Christ, I think that is not that is probably not truthful enough to just call it that. It for a church that is saying that all they listen to are the red letters of the Bible, they have a lot of rules, and there are a lot of boundaries set that I think have caused a lot of harm. But I didn't know that growing up. Growing up, one of the and if I could think, like, my identity was not, and I think this is probably true for a lot of people who grew up in the Church of Christ, my identity wasn't only Christian. If somebody came up and asked me, hey, what are you, or what do you believe? As a kid, I'm not going to say, oh, I'm a Christian. I'm going to say, I go to the Church of Christ. I'm a Church of Christ. I go to Fairview Heights Church of Christ. I go to Bellevue Church of Christ. I go to Pearl Harbor Church of Christ. Like, it is that was the type of Christian I was. And the COC, because they did not have sort of this like overarching, governing body like you would see with the Catholics or the Presbyterians or anything like that, they still had to have a way to let people know this is what we are expecting from the Church of Christ. But how could you do that if you have, 500 to 1,000 autonomous little churches in your area? How do you let them know? Well, you let them know through things like newsletters that went out. And so I remember my grandparents would get like the Church of Christ newsletter. And the Gospel Advocate would like come, and back in the day, and this was the Gospel Advocate may still do this, but it doesn't have as much of a stronghold in like the mainstream churches of Christ. But back in the day, they would on the very back page list all the churches that were in error, all the preachers who were in error, all of the teachers who were in error. And it could be anything from, hey, this person thinks it's okay to clap during songs. Because for a lot of people, clapping became an instrument as well. So it wasn't just like clapping was your percussion instrument. We went to a church. I remember visiting a church in Virginia, and I was in the youth group. And the youth had just come back from a trip, and they had like learned a song, and they learned like clapping with it, and they clapped, and it was like Sunday night, and like several families got up and walked out, and then the next day they had like a meeting, a business meeting, talking about how they were going to like fire the youth minister for allowing this to happen because that clapping was like a percussion instrument. And so that is just like one example, and that's pretty extreme. It wasn't back when I was a lot younger. It's a little more extreme now, I think, because people are
Mm.
finding that a lot of people are leaving, and so there's some readjustment on what they believe, but it started as, if it says we can do it in the Bible, we can do it. And if it doesn't mention it in the Bible, then we can't do it.
Mm.
And that interpretation, you would think, should be up to autonomous, just who that group of elders is. But it started to become, we're going to create newsletters, we're going to create schools. So you'll see Church of Christ schools start having conferences every year, and in those conferences people are going, and so it's sort of like, it's not, none of this is formalized, but it is formal, because if you step out of it, you're no longer Church of Christ.
Mm.
The effect of that, though, is one of the things that the COC does very well is community. And so once you're in, you're all in. And it is this sense of, you have somebody in your corner. You go to a Church of Christ, man, they're showing up for anything that you need. They're feeding you. They're taking care of all of your needs. For a kid who is moving every 3 years, losing a friend group, kind of shy, kind of socially awkward, kind of not knowing like where to fit, having a church like that is like, oh yeah, come on in. You're spending your Sunday mornings, your Sunday nights, your Wednesday nights, your Friday nights, maybe your Saturdays if you're doing stuff like with the youth group. And so you get this sense of family and community. And so growing up throughout my life, my home wasn't the house, it wasn't the base, it wasn't the military. My home was whatever church we placed membership in, whatever church we landed in. I knew from a
Mm.
very young age, I was not only, there were no other options for me other than the Church of Christ. That was where I was going to be. And when it came to thinking about college, I remember from a very, very young age, it was going to be Harding University in Searcy, Arkansas, or it was going to be Lipscomb University in Nashville, or any of the other like 3 or 4 Church of Christ affiliated schools. There was no other option for me. Not that I wanted one, and not even that my parents were super harsh about that. It was just my reality. And so from a very young age, we were very, very ensconced in church culture and church language, and faith language. And that had a huge impact on me growing up. I loved the Bible. And that was one thing that the Church of Christ just really taught me, was like this love for the Bible, that this Bible, this is God's word, right? And how amazing is it that God has like actually come and given us his word, and everything I was taught, everything is in the Bible. So for a kid who loved to read, who had trouble making friends sometimes, having the Bible was something that was extremely special to me. I loved it. I remember my favorite place to visit, like when I was a kid, we would go to the mall, and I would want to go to, like, the Christian bookstore, Lifeway, and I forget what it was before Lifeway, but I would just go in there and like just buy like all these Christian books, these like the teen study Bible, the children's Bible, the girls Bible, whatever. I would ask for Bibles for Christmas, for my birthday. I just loved it. And
I guess, were you a Bible quizzer?
I was. We
Okay.
did Bible Bowl. And I was able to now we moved a lot, so I didn't get to be on a team a lot, but we did Bible Bowl. I would go to I would go to like retreats, Bible study retreats. I would ask for like um Bible like devotionals to like fill out. And I loved it. So when I was 10, we lived in California, and one of the other things about the Church of Christ is that to be saved, you had to be baptized through immersion. And immersion baptism was a huge tenet of the Church of Christ. And so it was at the age of accountability where they were asking kids to do that. And the age of accountability was sort of like nobody could define it for you. Nobody could say like it's when you turn 15 or it's when you turn 13. It's just you just would know whenever you hit the age of accountability, that's when you're supposed to respond and become baptized. And so I remember being in Bible class, and they were talking about baptism, and I turned to my dad that afternoon, and I said, I think I need to be baptized. And he was like, well, are you sure? Because he felt like I was a little young. And I kind of wonder if for him that might have been one of the first, like, because my parents, I was an only child. My parents are amazing parents. And
That's awesome.
they were really encouraging of like anything that I wanted to do. Um, and I think for my dad, seeing his 10-year-old who was good, because I didn't, that was one of the things I remember crying one night because I had heard like a bad word at school, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And it was like I would think that word over and over again. I think it was the word, I think it was like hell. And I remember like going through a day where I kept thinking like hell. Oh my gosh, that's a bad word. Hell. Oh my gosh, that's a bad word. And I got myself so upset that I started crying like that night, just in tears, because I thought that I was going to go to hell because I kept thinking the bad word, even though I knew that the bad word was off limits. And so, and I remember bringing that to my parents, and it was around like that same time. And so I think them seeing me struggle with this might have put something in their heads of, this seems a little off. But he said to me at that time, he's like, if you want to, yeah, like you don't have have to. And I remember him saying that, and I thought that was weird because because the Church of Christ would say, absolutely, the minute you think that you need to, you better get in there and do it.
Was it a sense
But
of like you think that maybe they thought you didn't quite fully understand the gospel yet in every sense, like the truest sense?
I think maybe in the truest sense that, and then I think also just thinking, and maybe I might be seeing this too through the eyes of I have a daughter now, and I just can't imagine her being that age and thinking that she was going to go to hell unless she did something. And I think that that would break me. And I don't know where his head was there. But later on, we have talked about a lot of things. And I think one of the things that we have seen just with our faith and our religion is they get us young and they get us
Yes.
passionate, and then they stop us from asking any questions.
Mm.
And so when things feel kind of like weird or uncomfortable, we're sort of told to just like put that to the side.
For sure.
He baptized me when I was 10.
Your dad did?
My dad did, yeah.
Mm.
And I was baptized. Before that, I was fully in. After that, I was whatever fully in times like 1,000 was. Um, I remember having dreams. I would tell my dad. I mean, I was so in love with the idea of God and Jesus and all of that. I remember having dreams as a kid, and I would come back like the next morning saying, like, Jesus spoke to me. Have you ever had a dream about Jesus before? Because I have. Oh, I can't wait to go to heaven. And that was a big thing for me. And I was a really easygoing kid, but I think I had a lot of anxiety. And I mean, I was moving all the time, and I was in new situations a lot of the time. I was very, very close to my parents. We had a very small family. I didn't ever want to lose my parents. I was reading a lot. And I just remember there were so many times as a kid where I would be praying that Jesus would just come back. That I was just ready. I was ready for Jesus to come back and to take me to heaven, to be with my family forever and ever and ever. And I would never have to like experience them dying, and I would never have to experience like anything bad. And I had these, I mean, I was a very imaginative child and I like to write even as a kid, and I just remember doing like a lot of things. So like as a kid, I would like believe that God could hear me as I was talking to him, and that maybe one day he would come down and like have a discussion with me and like take me and my family back. I mean, there was a lot tied up in what I believed, this love that I believed that God had for me.
Mm. Can I ask
Um,
on that note, real quick
yeah.
question? I see a lot of studies that come through from mostly Christian perspectives as to why people deconvert, and they obviously like to try to explain it away in a psychological sense, and minimize and diminish your people's stories. But one of them that's been a recurring theme I'll see is they'll point out this idea that a lot of people who deconverted had a strained relationship with their fathers, or some kind of parent or parent figure. And I was just curious, not necessarily in that exact sense, but just when you look at your own parents and your father, do you feel like there was any correlation between, like, it sounds, I know you haven't dove too deep into your relationship with your parents, but it sounds like your relationship with your parents was very loving and very sweet. Do you feel like that transferred, like if they're this way and God is obviously the ultimate father, then the loving kindness that I'm seeing here must be just exponentially better there. Did you feel like that you made those correlations, and were there any or any correlations that you felt like you identified and said my parents, my parent figure in my mind affected my parent figure in heaven?
That's a very good question. And as I think about it, 100%, because and I think this comes up later as I start dealing with a lot more contradictions, I think, in my faith and the things that I experience. My dad and I are extremely incredibly close. My mom and I are extremely incredibly close. My dad is going through his own deconstruction phase right now. And after, 60 years of being really firmly within the COC, he's going through a lot of questions and has a lot of questions for me. And we have talks about this all the time. But one of the things that they have always been there. And they have always been supportive. I think it was very difficult for them to have a kid in the very beginning. I came, they didn't have any kids after me. I was we just clicked. They were very, and some of that could have been through us moving all the time together, and some of that could have just that they were just really supportive, and he was such a and I'm saying was because he's retired now, but I think about like who he was in the military, and I think if I had like a vision of who God was, that probably would have been my dad, like just the strong leader who everybody respected, who was kind, who had this like incredibly compassionate heart. And I saw him time and time again, just never, he was never worried about me visibly with any kind of question that I had. And he was very supportive of me anytime I would say, like, I would want to do something. He may not have understood it. And at times, I remember us having a lot of conversations where we were on very opposite sides of the fence, but he always led with love. And he and my mom were very intentional when they had me, I think, deciding, looking at their own childhoods and deciding who they wanted to be as parents and how that differed from what they had. And then so I think they were very intentional with that. So yes, awesome. I think that I think I had a sense of who God was based on who my dad was. And then when I started questioning things and I started seeing things and I started asking things, I would compare it with, well, my dad would never let that happen. I can't imagine my dad doing that. And then I became a parent, and then it all sort of crumbled there too, because I thought about who I would be as a mom and what I would allow. And if I had all the power in the universe to do everything, what wouldn't I do for my child? And why am I not seeing that play out here in the
It's
world?
Amazing what becoming a parent does to you.
I know exactly. So but one thing, and I think my dad always enjoyed a good debate, and he always enjoys like arguing and having discussions that are hard. And so anytime that I would come to him, he would just always be asking me questions. And I think he did it in like a Socratic way. But I don't know if he anticipated that a lot of the questions and developing that within me would actually cause a lot of my struggle eventually with the church. Because I had this love for God and because I had this love for the Bible, I wanted to speak. I loved theater, like drama, like all of that stuff. Being a military brat, being an Air Force brat, moving around a lot, the stage felt like the only place where I could like make friends. And I loved it. And I loved speaking. I loved public speaking. And I loved doing all of this. And I thought, how can I use this in church? And I came up against the Church of Christ, who was saying, you can't. And you can't because you're a girl.
Mm.
And that to me was really finding that out and realizing how that was going to affect my life really led me on this path, where I became kind of like this burr, I think, in the side of the communities that I was in, until eventually I became so much of one that the community said, yeah, we're done with you. And I was more exiled, I think, than I was accepted. And I looked up one day and thought, oh, I'll have that community here, and I didn't. And yeah.
Can I ask? And by the way, if I'm taking you away from your main story, feel free to take us back to whatever part we went off on. But I appreciate you kind of setting a context. This is really helpful for me because number one, I didn't know too much about Church of Christ, and just to get to know your backstory in this way is helpful. But there are a lot of church environments where the women go a very different route, meaning they're quite proud of the patriarchy. I do a lot of focus on, for example, Doug Wilson in Christ Church out in Idaho, and you get this real sense that groups like that and others like them, that it's not just that the men are saying we want to be the voice of God, as it were, to the church and the community and our families and the world and politics, but the women will kind of join with them. And obviously, there's a little nepotism there going on, whereas few get to have a platform, but most of the women are quite happy to be focused on being, meek, mild, soft-spoken, quiet, and they want the men. They want the men to be the leaders. They want to teach their own daughters even, like, if you could quiet yourself down and let the men do their thing for God, your life will just be so much more blessed. It's almost like in these one-off stories in the Bible where a woman like, Deborah or someone else stands up and says, I'll take charge, I'll do it. It's almost like, yeah, that's an accommodation, but as soon as it gets fixed, like, step back down. You've just put the men to shame. Hopefully the men will do the right thing now. And you just, and when you read Proverbs 31 and other passages, you get this real strong sense through some of these passages that the best way, and what is it, Titus 2, be discreet, chaste, keep her at home, lover of your husband and children. You get the sense that there's like a lot of women that grow up in these that just think, I know my place and I want my place. Like, I want to be that quiet woman. It sounds like, but for whatever reason, your life events and your personality, that didn't quite happen. What do you think caused the difference that made you want to be more vocal and more questioning things and just not going through the party line? And maybe let me add to that. What would you say that there was ever a point at which you were tempted to, like, did that ever sound like the best route to just take a quieter path?
No, it didn't. And I think that is a very good question. I'm going to blame the Air Force for that a little bit. We moved every 3 years. And so if I didn't say things to people, I would not have friends. So there was a sense that I think from just my circumstances where I did find that I had to speak if I wanted to be heard. Um even just within, and we're talking about like even just within group of girls that I would want to be around, because if I didn't, it was just hard to like break in to like new settings as the new kid. And so I found ways to offset that, by being like clowning around a little bit or being louder, trying to find ways to like organize things that I would, and I would be like this little organizer of like, oh, you guys don't have like, maybe we could put on a puppet show, or like maybe we could like, and I remember like as a kid like going into spaces like that. It never, there's another part that I think is probably pretty significant in my faith development. That because I moved so often, instead of going to public school, my parents put me into private school because every time we moved, it was just easier. We wouldn't like, because we wouldn't be there right in the time that school started. It was more in line with their values because they were looking for a Christian environment to raise me. But because the churches of Christ are not as like well known as like Baptist schools or anything, all the schools that I went into were different denominations. So whereas most of my peers in the COC only had examples of a Christianity that existed within the Church of Christ, I went to Catholic school in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, and 11th and 12th grade. And I went to Lutheran school in uh third and fourth grade, and I went to a Church of Christ school in fifth grade, and I went to Assembly of God school in ninth and 10th grade. And so I started making relationships with people outside of the Church of Christ who were also just as passionate about God. And I was being told by the COC, we're the only church, we're the only Christians, but I have Mrs. Dunn, who's my seventh grade teacher, who had been a Catholic, all of her life and extremely devout. And I couldn't imagine her going to hell. And so, I'm sitting here in seventh grade trying to hold these two truths and seeing, well, wait, you're saying that she's lost because she's Catholic, but also I've just spent, all this time with her in school, watching her lead prayers and all of this stuff. And so I had this exposure to a lot of strong women in other denominations. Now, I'm not saying those denominations did not also have their issues with women and their issues with all of that, but compared to the COC, where women are silent always, where women were not even allowed to go to like business meetings, those were only open to men for decision making, where women sometimes would get called on the carpet because they stood up to pass a plate around for the Lord's Supper, where women couldn't even, lead a song or anything. Being in a classroom where a woman said, Kaitlin, can you go ahead and do the sign of the cross for us? I'm like, what? Because that to me is like, well, on one hand, that's that is absolutely not what we're supposed to be doing. On the other hand, wow, this is exhilarating. And I experienced it in Catholic school, and then I experienced it in Assembly of God school, where they were all about the testimony. And so I remember being in ninth grade and my teacher saying, well, Kaitlin, do you want to do the testimony for chapel? and it was public speaking. And I was like, yeah, I'll do the testimony for chapel. So I get up there, this Church of Christ girl who has been told in her Bible classes that I've been raising my hand too much, that I need to give the boys a chance to speak, who has had lots of experiences up to this point of being told by teachers that I need to step back, that I need to be quieter, that I cannot say the things that I'm saying. And then this Assembly of God school saying, hey, come and give your testimony. And I did. And they went to the altar call, and I said, what? God didn't strike me down. And I had this fire. I had this fire inside of me that was saying, I want to do this. I want to talk about my relationship with God. How can I do that? And so then I started seeing, can I be in charge of girls' Bible studies? Because like within the COC, that was really all I could do. Like I'd go to my youth minister. Hey, can I lead a girls' Bible study? Can we do this girls that I would like love the popcorn prayers, because eventually, like with popcorn prayers, as long as a guy started it and as long as a guy ended it, the girls could say whatever they wanted to in the middle of it. And so I was loving all of that. And so by the time that I got to high school, not only had I like developed this love for the Bible, not only had I developed this love for public speaking, but I also thought, I just want the church to be like my whole world. Now, as a high school student, the way that I saw that playing out was going to a Christian school and getting married to a youth minister so that I could be the youth minister's wife, and awesome. lead the youth ministry, the girl part of the youth ministry there. And so that was my goal. My goal was that's what I'm going to do. So we moved away from that Assembly of God. We were in DC, and we moved to Ohio in my junior year of high school. We went to a church there, and I think I was coming just off the high of my experiences back in DC. And so I was just not being careful. And we got to this youth group, and this youth group didn't have a youth minister. They were actually searching for one. It was a smaller church. I got to know the people there. We realized like the elders weren't really asking the teens what they wanted. And so my organizer heart said, hey, everybody, let's meet after church. My dad will get pizza. My dad, who is an instigator and supportive, was like, yeah, I'll go get pizza for you guys. Go ahead and have a teen-led meeting where then you could present the elders with all these ideas for who you want as a youth minister. And granted, I think about the courage I had as a 16-year-old who was new doing this, but I was like, I didn't foresee any problems with it. And so I went to all of the teens and I said, let's meet afterwards. Tell your parents to like come pick you up in an hour. My dad's gonna go get us pizza for lunch. And I had like put all the chairs out in a circle, and I had a chalkboard, and I was like, and I was just going for it. So I was like, okay, so the elders don't want to know what you want. You tell me what you want. What are you looking for in a youth minister? And I remember like writing it all down, and I was just really, I was just really excited about this experience. And so I'm talking and we're writing things down, and the hour has passed, and then we stop. And there was a boy who was in the youth ministry as well. And he just looks at me, and I just remember the look, and like he has his arms crossed. He's like, first of all, why are you even talking? And I remember he said that like in front of everybody, and like my heart just like I don't know, I just got cold, and like my stomach just dropped. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, you know, it says in the Bible that women are supposed to be silent, and you are not even supposed to be leading this. I don't know who you think you are, but you need to stop. And
Wow.
I remember just being like, I had heard it. Obviously, I'd heard it all my life. For some reason, I just didn't think it applied to me. I it was so weird. And I don't remember how it ended, because I just sort of, I felt like this buzzing in my head. People left. My dad picked me up. I remember walking upstairs. My mom came and said, hey, the preacher's daughter is on the phone for you. She gives me the phone, and the preacher's daughter was like, who was older and in college, but had like helped out in the youth group a little bit. She said, hey, Kaitlin, I really appreciate your passion, but I think you really made a big misstep here. And that kind of stuff needs to go through the elders. And I'm not mad at you, but I think just next time you need to run stuff like that by the elders before you say the things that you're going to say.
Mm.
And I remember crying. I remember crying like all night over that. And it was just it was such a small thing, it felt like, but it also felt so huge, and I didn't know what to do with it. So
Mm.
I mean, I never I stuck with them. I don't think I led anything again. We got a youth minister, and then I went away to college, and that was its whole other experience at Harding University, where
I
I
guess
could,
before you share
yeah,
that story, what was your parents' response to that church story with the boys' response to you?
I don't remember.
Gotcha.
I and I don't know. I don't think they were happy. And I remember us, it's still a story that we tell to this day, because I think it was the beginning of the end for me without me like even knowing it. But I think looking back, it really was. So we tell it, but like I honestly don't have a memory of like after all of that happened. I think I just sort of like, I feel like I just sort of slotted into place. The next 2 years there, just sort of did my thing, and then
Mm.
went on to school.
It's overwhelming though.
Tried to forget about it.
It's overwhelming the amount of um, kind of public humiliation that's entailed in that, and obviously a lot of it's like patriarchy much, but the public humiliation in the sense of basically saying, please sit down and be quiet, and like to do that in a public way, especially. And I know the you said the woman did it separately on the phone, but for the boy to do that publicly, that's incredible. And it's amazing to me too, the context of, when you look at so many people in the church being just dead, in the sense of like they don't really care. They just seem like they're going through the motions. Even like that passage in Isaiah 6, the Lord says, who's going to go for us? And Isaiah's like, here am I, send me, I'll do it. I've got the passion, and I'm ready to go. I'll do whatever I need to do. And for you to be that, and that mindset to say, there are people that are just kind of pew warmers around me, and I'm willing to be on fire for the Lord. If them to say basically no, it's incredible. And obviously, things for the Lord don't matter to me anymore. I think it's all mythology, but just at that stage when everyone around you is kind of saying, won't anybody stand up in passion for God? And you stand up in passion for God and get shut down. I just the the ability for people to I mean, I think the word might be cruelty, just for people to be
Yeah.
so cruel it's horrifying. I'm so sorry
Yeah.
to hear that. That's a crazy story.
Thank you. Yeah, I think now, as I've really taken multiple steps back and totally shedded, everything that I grew up with. I see stories like that in different settings, and I wonder, like, how did how did I go on so long afterwards trying to fit that in as being like an okay thing? Like, I was in fifth grade, and we were at church, and they had brought in a preacher, a pretty popular preacher from the South, to talk to the teens. Our fifth grade teacher wanted to listen to him speak to the teens during class. So she brought the fifth graders into this class. He was talking about sex. Now, the idea of purity culture and the way that the Church of Christ has ever approached sex and women and modesty and all of that, I knew in fifth grade that this was a very uncomfortable discussion, one that I did not want to be a part of at all. She brings us all the way up to the front row. And so he starts talking to the high schoolers, and I remember bringing out my Bible to read. It gets quiet, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And I look up, and he's standing over me, and he's probably like in his 50s or 60s at this time. And he's standing over me, and it's like silent in the whole auditorium. And he's like, young lady, what are you doing? I was like, I am reading my Bible. And he's like, you need to close that, and you need to pay attention to me and what I am saying. And I just remember, and it was in front of everybody, and there was no apology, and there's so many instances like that where it was just so normalized. And I think back on it, and I think, like, for me, eventually my way of dealing with that is to push back. And eventually I got to that place. But I think for a lot of people who have had these same experiences, the road most traveled is going to be to just absorb it and say, okay. And I just think about, like, the heaviness that a lot of women who are still in the Church of Christ, who are still in purity culture, who are still um in a church that does not affirm them or affirm their gifts or anything. I think there is a lot of weight, invisible weight, that women are carrying, that has gone unacknowledged,
Mm.
I feel like.
Agreed. It's you you do get that sense that for some women they're just so used to it they don't even question it, but it you feel it. And I think as a dad, I've got two little girls, two little boys as well. But when I look at my two little girls, I just think, knowing that background that you're describing, I'm like, this, I have to rescue them from this. Like, I
Yeah.
have to. They have to be empowered. They have to have a voice. And I love the fact that, people like yourself and me and other people, as we talk about this stuff, we're like, we see how negative this was to girls. And some of it's just like assumptions, and it's just like the culture, even beyond the church. But it's just like the culture is like, women need to sit down and shut up. It's like, and to be able to say to the next generation, that horrific messaging stops with this generation.
Yeah,
Girls are
absolutely.
now just as powerful and able to speak and have a voice. And it's the autonomy issue is just, it's huge. So Yeah, I've got a lot of I could say to it, but I want to keep going. I'm also, as you can probably hear, I've got a little cold going, so I'm not gonna
Yes, you
do
do.
my voice here. But I appreciate you bringing that topic up. That's
Yeah.
such a big part of this.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, I mean, I think that I could probably talk. I've already talked a really long time, and I feel like I could probably talk a lot longer about like all of these little experiences. They were little like that, but they were there were multiple ones of them. I went to school, I went to college to Harding University, which was an extremely conservative Church of Christ affiliated school. And I started studying social work, and that social work department was probably like my lifesaver.
Mm.
Because it was the first time that I had ever been exposed to liberal ideas, what I called liberal, what I called progressive, this idea that somebody could that maybe welfare was a good program, that maybe voting Democrat wasn't going to send you to hell. That I remember the Obama election happened during Harding, and I felt like such a rebel because I bought like a Bisons for Obama shirt, and like we would all wear them around and feel like, you know, we'd be like this group of like 10 kids on a campus where everybody else was like just staring at us. And
That's awesome.
I just remember I think Harding did the opposite of what Harding wanted to do. Harding radicalized me in the
Mm.
sense of I started hearing and seeking out people who were saying things that were different than what I'd heard from the church. And I was in the honors college, and I went to England abroad for like a semester, which was a lot of fun. And Harding had tons of rules. Harding had rules like don't wear shorts after before 2 to class, and like a lot of rules around what women could wear, a lot of like don't sign out, like you couldn't leave campus unless you had your parents' permission. Like there were a lot of things like that. But we went to England and the rules just weren't there. And I think it was like an oversight. We had a very, very chill faculty who were watching out for us. And so they basically said, go do your thing. I was the RA, and they never called me for like things to like check in. And so in that situation, like being in England, it was a small group of us that had been so sheltered, and then we were just a semester abroad by ourselves. And I grew a lot around that time. And I remember I had like organized we didn't want to go to the Church of Christ that was set up in England. And so I organized the Sunday services over there. And I just remember, I mean, they would have allowed me to do that had I been back in Cersei. But being in England with just the small group of us, it was fine. And so I
That's
was
huge.
like organizing like Bible studies that we were having, and like I just started getting more of a taste for it, and
And nobody was trying to rein you in.
nobody was trying to rein me in. Nobody knew I was
Mm.
doing it. So nobody
That's
was
awesome.
trying to rein me in. We got back to campus, and they were having mission trips, spring break mission trips. And I remember, I think I was just riding off the high of being in England. And so I tried to sign up to lead one, and administration was like, no way. You have to have boy do this with you. I don't care if they're like a freshman and you're like a senior in college. You need to have a male lead.
Mm.
Um,
It's hard to wrap
and
my
so
mind around some of that stuff anymore.
I know. So it was just back to that. Um, I left I left school, I graduated, and I moved to Nashville. Um, and I lived with my grandmother, worked for the state, working with adults with disabilities at the rehabilitation center. And in the meantime, I was looking for church because for me, that was just the value instilled in me is anytime you move somewhere, anytime you go somewhere, you find your church home and like you sit and you make it work. And so I did, and I found a church that had like this thriving single focus group, where it was all like people who had just graduated school through their like late 20s, and we were getting together in these groups, and I wanted to lead one of those, and I got put with a co-leader who just he was there because he was a he, and that was the extent, and I led everything, but every time the church would like announce it, his name would be front and center. And so it was just I was having a lot of like new experiences and getting more and more frustrated. And I remember being at Starbucks with a friend and we were talking about something and it just hit me. We were talking about like why we majored in what we majored in and like why we decided what we did. And I said it was like a revelation. Like I had never had this kind of like settling of the spirit. If we could say that that's what in the moment that's what I thought it was when I said I know beyond a doubt that if I had been born male I would have gone and gotten my degree in Bible and become a preacher. And I know that that's what I would have done, and I would have done that for the rest of my life and been very happy about it. And I said that to that person and just burst into tears, like started crying because I was like, that was what I was supposed to do with my life. I was supposed to be a preacher. I was supposed to, um, and I couldn't do that. There was no path available to me. I didn't see it available in school, and so it felt like mourning a life that I could have had or should have had or wanted had I had been a different gender. And that threw me into a spiral a little bit when I was right out of school.
Can I throw in a
And
question?
then, yeah,
How did you deal with that in the context of you talked about how much you loved the word of God before. It was just your life. I know that there's a lot of progressive Christians and other people that look at certain passages like, women should remain silent in the churches, and they find ways to explain them away. And some of them are very creative and a little bit kind of like, okay. And some of them are they bring in maybe a historical aspect and it's like, okay, maybe there actually is, maybe this shouldn't have been interpreted this way all this time. Who knows? Obviously to some of us it doesn't matter anyway, but people find ways to stay under the umbrella of those verses in different ways these days. But either way, like if you have as your premise, like my premise is not what does Tim want? What does Kaitlin want? My premise is not how do I feel about it? My premise is not does this hurt me? My premise is the authority of the word of God is first and foremost. My responsibility is to preserve God's holiness and to preserve his justice and to preach his love and the gospel. When you look at those verses, we talk about that phrase, the slippery slope, like if you start to diminish at all the idea that God's word is the first and the last word on any subject, that you're on that slippery slope now. Like if you're gonna, for us it was real big with, if you don't take Genesis 1 literally, if that's eons and evolution might be true, then maybe Abraham this and maybe Moses wasn't real. And like, don't cut away from the word of God. Keep it as strong as you can. And then just let it do its thing because it's so powerful. But it sounds like there were some ways in which I'm guessing you were allowing there might be another interpretation. Was that what's happening where you're thinking maybe those verses didn't mean that? Or were you just saying this just doesn't sound right? And how did you, if it was more of the second one, how did you deal with the concern about if I'm willing to ignore that verse, then what other verses am I going to ignore next? And eventually it's like, okay, well, what's left? You've just kind of, scalped the Bible to pieces.
Yeah, 100%. So this is where I think my spiral started. My first crisis, I think, of faith, my first major crisis of faith. I had many situations back when I was a kid where I would be like, oh man, like I prayed for this and I didn't get it and blah blah blah. But like I was able to conceptualize that pretty well through reading, like just through the verses. Oh, well, it says, in Jeremiah 29:11, like I had all these ways. So this was the first time that I had like ever sat to consider, like, there is something within me that I cannot explain, and I cannot explain it through the words. So I'm going to quickly have to do some major like rearranging of either how I am reading this or what I believe. And I was not ready to do rearranging of how I believe. And so I had to do some major rearranging of how I was reading. Because this was the first time that I felt I think again, like if I'm going to use religious language, I have a different take on this now, obviously, but I think back then, using religious language, I think I felt, this is the first time that I felt a calling. I felt something stirring so deeply in my spirit that there was no other question than to respond to it. I had felt what I thought was God speak so like just clearly to me in that moment that I have an aspiration and I have a heart to preach. And that is what I wanted to do. And that is what I've wanted to do my whole life. And that is what God has put me on this earth to do. And for some reason, I can't do it. And I had never before, the COC is not very open to works of the Holy Spirit. It is very much an intellectual faith system in the way of we read and we respond to that. Any feeling that you have, you really should be suspicious of it, because any feeling that you have is the devil.
Yeah.
Any feeling or emotion that you have is Satan trying to trick you. And I had never worried about that before because I had never felt anything like that before until Starbucks when I'm like 23 years old, thinking, oh my gosh, how could my life have been different had I just been born male? And I knew, well, I still love God. This is still true. Surely this is still true. So maybe this thing that I love, the Bible, maybe I'm reading it wrong. And that's what I like poured myself into. I did like all of this research online. I wrote a blog post about it, and somebody called me up after reading my blog post and said, hey, I just wanted to let you know that Lipscomb has a program that you can go into, and it's a Women in the Bible, and you can take this class, and it's an MDiv class, but it's open to anybody. Like you could just go and take it, and it's about hermeneutic and like let me explain what that is, and it's about how to read the Bible, and it's about how to look at these passages on women. and reinterpret them, because this person who was calling me was in the Church of Christ, was a woman who wanted to preach. And so then I found what I thought were my people. I joined some Facebook groups. I registered for this class, and I started taking MDiv courses to say, okay, I still love the Bible. I still love God. Surely I was reading it wrong. And so I took a hermeneutic course on like how were these things translated. I had like 10 different books showing me like views on women and what was the history and all of that, until I could make it fit in my mind. Hey, it's still a calling. The Church of Christ just read this wrong. And now I'm going to try to throw my eggs into the basket of these progressive COCers who are rereading the scripture. They haven't quite got there on LGBT issues. They haven't quite got there on liberal politics, but they are there on women. So maybe I can join this group and then feel an alignment in my spirit. And everything will go back to where it was when I was 5, having dreams of Jesus and still being deeply in love. So let me try, with them. And I did from 2024 to 31. And it did not work out for me. And for a lot of reasons, and I think some of them are the more that you open yourself up to questioning, the more questions that are going to come up. And there were a lot of things that were just not sitting right with me. I started talking about a lot more. I took these classes. My goal was, I'm going to go get my MDiv, and then I'm gonna go just preach. I'm gonna go preach in a more progressive church, or I'm gonna get ordained in the Episcopal Church, and everything's gonna work out well. And I started having conversations with people who were within the progressive churches of Christ and still saw that patriarchy and experienced it, and still saw and experience their need for that power and that control, and they were not answering my questions in the way that I needed the questions answered. Then I saw the way that the church just sort of bowed down to the Republican Party, to Donald Trump. My questions still weren't getting answered. I was being told from the progressive faction that I needed to be quieter and more patient and kinder and sweeter, in the way that I was too abrasive, that I was coming off in a way that was pushing people away, that nobody would listen to me if I said things in that way, that I was being too harsh on the things, that I wasn't being forgiving enough. I started speaking out. A lot of what my job entails, I work with people with disability, and I work in violence against women, like domestic violence and sexual violence. And I saw a lot of that happening within the church. And anytime that I would speak about it, I would have, no matter which faction was talking to me, saying that I couldn't call this out, that this was just something that we had to deal with. And it just never sat right with me. And so I felt a storm that just kept brewing inside, like more and more. And the only way that I could even explain what I was feeling was by writing it down. And that's a lot of where my poetry came from at first, was just, I don't have the words for things. I couldn't articulate it. I couldn't say it. The only thing I could do was write it, and I could only write it in poetry. And so I did, and I just threw it on the page, and I just wrote poem after poem after poem, talking about just my frustrations with the church and my frustrations with patriarchy and my frustrations with all of this. And as I was writing, I was like, there's something that I'm just not being honest with. Like there's still a part of this that is not, that I am still hiding from myself. And I didn't know what it was, because I was like, if I could just get this all to work, like it felt like fitting a square peg in like a round hole. Like I was like, if I could just get this to work, if I could just get it to fit, if I could just find the community that's okay with the way that I use my voice, or if I could just find the community that is all right with me saying these things, or that wants to make a change, or that wants to focus on justice, social justice, and all of that. If I could find that community, I would be happy. And it was like the questions kept coming. What kind of God would allow this? Does God even exist? And it started to become, I would write my poems, and then I would say, I don't know if that is fully as far as I want to go. I don't know if that is exactly everything that I'm feeling. I had a friend pass away from cancer, a young friend pass away from cancer. I had my daughter had a immune disorder, and we were in and out of the hospital when she was really young for a few years. COVID hit. I saw the things happening at the border. And it's not like I was unaware of the trauma of the world or anything, but I was very sheltered as a kid. And I think the more that I was getting frustrated with the church, I realized that a lot of those frustrations were with God. And when I allowed myself to start unpacking what that meant, then things started to unravel majorly. And
how long ago was this?
This was probably, now, I would say it started probably about 3 years ago.
Okay.
And then maybe a little bit before then, a little bit before COVID. And then COVID, because of our daughter's immune disorder, we stayed fairly quarantined. So there's a lot of time to think and focus on yourself. We had stopped. We were going to church sporadically anyway, like back then, and then we stopped, and that to me was like the final nail. I think I started really writing and thinking and talking to people online, throwing myself into my job, throwing myself into my daughter, asking a lot of questions, and probably and realize, 3 years ago, well, what if somebody offered me a church? What if somebody offered me, like, hey, Kaitlin, like, you can preach at this like super progressive church that is like affirming and welcoming to all and like social justice minded, like, would you go and do it? And I had asked myself that, and the answer was no. And the answer was no because I realized coming out of that, I no longer believe in God. I no longer believe in everything that I had made my life around. I don't I don't think he exists. And it maybe it started from a place of frustration, and maybe it started from a place of like I've had these like mini MI like mini traumas, where it was like this just didn't work out. But the longer that I sat with it, the longer I was a mom, the longer I thought about everything that I would do for my daughter, the more that I was reading, the more that I was looking, the more that I realized that um I just logically and rationally I cannot make excuses for this religion anymore. And I'm not going to hide behind God, because I don't believe God exists anymore. And what is that going to do? Now that caused a whole other, I spiraled hard there because that was what my whole all of me was based on. That is a loss and a grief that even though I believe God doesn't exist, that was still something that I was grieving, and something that I felt like I lost. But within this past year, when I can confidently say, not only have I deconstructed, but I have deconverted. I am not a Christian. I am an atheist. And at a certain point, I realized that this this relationship that I had no longer exists. This relationship that I had based my whole life around, that was the most important relationship in my life, was based on somebody who is not real. And there was a little bit of spiraling that went on there when I finally came to the conclusion, feel about like a year ago, maybe even less than a year ago. I feel like this is very recent, to where I feel comfortable saying the words, I am not a Christian, I am an atheist. And it's not just because of the bad stuff. And I feel like a lot of Christians might say, it just really feels like you picked up your ball and you went home. Like it was just like you just got mad about it. And that is what I get on my page all the time, that people will tell me, you're just bitter. Like you were bitter, and you were angry, and you were acting out of your bitterness, and you're acting out of your anger. And I really hope that one day you will find healing and come back to God. And it's very hard to explain what I'm feeling inside of, I am healed. This is me healing. This is me healing. Because I don't have, do I have grief around the 30, 3 years before this, that I spent 100% in it? Yeah, there is some grief there. There are good memories there. There's also some grief there. But I feel the most me, and the most free, and the most open than I ever have my entire life as a Christian, because my values are no longer boxed in by all of these rules and excuses that I have to give for God on why he's not helping people in the margins, or why he's not fixing things. or why things are not better. And I can live, I'll use the word authentically. I can live authentically, but I can live my values. I can live my morals. I am a better person without God than I ever was with God.
Hmm.
And I am a kinder, more compassionate, more justice focused person without God than I ever was with God. And I am fully under the belief of, and I would never force anybody to leave their faith, but I am fully under the belief that we could be a kinder, more compassionate, better world without Christianity than with Christianity. And this is coming from somebody who loved Jesus so much. I was seeing him in my dreams. um it's a journey that I am protective of, because I even have I mean, you can probably see here, I have trouble figuring out how to even articulate it sometimes. But I am very protective of it, and it is frustrating when people constantly are telling me that I was not a true Christian, or I was not really, I didn't really believe, or I didn't really understand, because it was real. It was real as anything is real, and it was a very, very deep relationship that I had, um, that I no longer have, for many reasons, and all reasons that I think have bettered me as a person.
Hmm. What a journey. Can I ask, you mentioned you were at that point you already were married, had a child. What was the situation and context as you were having these discussions with your husband? Was it a journey you were able to take together?
Yeah, it was both of us. And I I have been just really incredibly lucky, when it comes to my relationships, as far as that goes. My husband has been incredibly supportive. He's right there with me, so we've been taking the same journey together.
Hmm.
um
That's awesome.
my daughter, is still young, so there wasn't a lot that we have had so far to do to, like, come back and say, hey, we were really wrong. So I've been grateful for that. And then also, I will say, my parents too have just been so supportive. And there are times where I am sure I make them uncomfortable. They are not at the same place that I am right now, but they have both been open. They like everything that I post, even though that I'm sure their friend group is unhappy about it. They share the things that I post. My dad will text me all the time and check in on how I'm doing and ask me questions, and he's open to it. And so, I have that has been something that I have been able to take with me, where I have lost relationships, but I have not lost those relationships that are the closest to me. And I think that
Hmm.
has been very helpful,
That's awesome.
through this journey. Yeah.
Just by way of contrast, my journey's been a little bit more painful. I've certainly seen situations where it's much worse, specifically when I've interviewed JWs, ex-JWs, where like literally they haven't spoken to their own kids in 20 years, not by their choice, but by their kids' choice. But I know, for example, when I deconverted, my mom wouldn't talk to me about it at all for a while. It was just too painful. And we finally had a heart to heart a couple of years ago, and she was very honest. She said, "I wish I were dead. I've brought a child into this world who's going to burn in hell. I wish I were dead." And I don't know for sure because we don't talk about it much, but I suspect she feels somewhat similarly. But just the weight, the burden of that is just, it's
Yeah.
overwhelming to think. You really think that? And stepping back from just that immediate situation in my story, it's always bothered me to think about the idea, like when, not always, I should say, always since my deconversion, as I think about this stuff, to think you really are going to be in heaven in your mind. You think you're going to be in heaven worshiping God and loving it. And you according to the Bible, you kind of have to be proud that he's going to punish evildoers. And so you're going to be worshiping God while your loved ones, your own children, are burning. And she and other people that I know certainly do believe that. And and yet you're going to say, "But God, you are good. You're a good, good Father." And it definitely strikes me as like it's a great example of how when you get indoctrinated deep enough that it's like this Stockholm syndrome, you love your captor and you can't
Yes.
see past the most basic stuff. And I'm this is a silly example I'll use, but I use it a lot because it's not the biggest issue in the room. But like, why why was it okay for me to think that there's a God who wants to cut off into little boys' penises? Like I know there's other way, there's slavery, there's child brides, there's genocide, but like that alone is like, I'm sorry, that doesn't make any sense. And when you pile on all the other big, huge issues on top of that, it's like this whole thing just crumbles. And I think for me, and I wanted to ask you about this if this was at all part of your journey. For me, my journey was not about the objections. It started there. I don't know if you
Mhm.
know my story enough, but I was sitting around with the kids as as you do, doing Bible time with the kids and singing songs, praising the Lord. And we're singing Joshua fought the battle of Jericho. And again, I apologize for my voice, I'm a little sick today. But we're singing Joshua fought the battle of Jericho. And of course, they're spinning around, having fun, giggling, singing the song, Jesus loves me and all that. We get to Joshua fought the battle of Jericho. You know that song?
Yes.
Okay. And I know in my mind that it's a cute little song, but I know in my mind what happens next in this story. And for the first time in my life, the very first moment, something inside me just cringed and I said, when I eventually share with them the full story, I'm going to have to defend genocide in the name of God. And that was nowhere near enough to deconvert me. It was just like oh my gosh, that's uncomfortable. But all these little seeds started developing. And eventually for me, it got to the, like, all those objections that you could pile up: genocide, land theft, slavery, child brides. What about those? Are you really comfortable? I actually was, in some ways, to my shame. What got me out was none of those things, because I had a very strong premise of, the authority of the word of God. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. Your feelings about it are irrelevant. And you certainly, as a, in the context of like the typical worm theology, you can't judge God and you don't understand the gravity of sin. And if he says someone deserves to die, they deserve to die. End of story. So that was, with I was a 5 point Calvinist. That was I was like proud to be saying that stuff. I remember I've used this example before. I remember here in Atlanta, the last big church I went to is called Perimeter Church. Pastor Randy Pope, and he was preaching a sermon. It wasn't about this what I'm going to say the whole thing, but he was using it as an example. But he was talking about how people were coming to the church and were surprised that like this is a Calvinist church, because it's very seeker sensitive. He's like, you all need to understand, we're a Calvinist church. You understand that we're Presbyterian. And he said, I want to explain to you some of the ways that comes out. And he said, I was I was I was counseling a woman the other day whose baby died, like, but not in birth, but like a year after it was born. And this woman was so grieved, so grieved. And he said that the thing I had to bring her back to was, ma'am, theology. This is about theology. You won't heal unless your theology's right. Ma'am, your baby deserved to die. We all do. And I nodded my head inside. I was like, yes, theology trumps everything. The only thing that got me out, the only thing, was comparative mythology. To realize that this Jesus
Mm.
character is based so heavily on the other Greek gods, on the Homeric epics, on Euripides' Bacchae, on all kinds of other stuff that I could talk about. But was comparative mythology a part of your story at all? And like, or were you? Was it much more just like this just doesn't add up anymore?
I think comparative mythology came later, after I had already started like to walk away, because for me, it was the question of suffering that was the part that I began. Everything else unraveled, and everything else came after that, and the more that I was reading and learning and stuff. But it started with me around the question of suffering. I remember being in a prayer service after one of the big tsunamis that happened. I think it was back in 2012 or 2014, in Japan. And it hit me. And somebody was standing up there and he was like, "Oh, can we just pray for God's, protection, and for God to come in this situation?" And behind him, a slideshow was playing of like the destruction and like the names of all the people who had died. And it was like, I forget, it was a large number, in an incredibly large number of people who died from that tsunami and earthquake. And I remember just feeling like a stone in my gut going, this isn't right. Why who are we praying to do what? And he didn't beforehand. And it was still going to be like several years after that. But I remember that was the first natural disaster that had sort of stirred me to think like, hey, something is not right here. Why are we praying that God, intervenes in getting a parking spot, and he didn't intervene in this situation? And this isn't even a situation where you could say it's people's bad decision making that led to this. This is a natural disaster. So natural disasters for me was like the first thing that like really got me thinking, this is not, something is not right here. I start unraveling that, and then have all of these other experiences, and then start thinking about suffering, becoming a mom, seeing how if what I believe the Bible is true, and that I am a fallen human being with sin who is not perfect, can look at my daughter and say, I will burn the earth down to protect her, like this amount of protection and love that I feel for this person as a fallen individual, as somebody who is not perfect. What's going on up there? What is it that I am not, that is not connecting for me? And then once I was able to sort of like unpack that and go, oh, I don't think there's anybody driving this ship. I don't think there's anybody up there. I was able to read like myths and read things that have gone on in history, and start comparing religions, and start comparing what I know of the world and what we know of science and what we know of all of this stuff. And I have found myself being a lot more open to things that I wasn't open to, and a lot more closed to things that I used to be open to. And so everything is kind of like topsy-turvy, but I feel very I feel very firm and confident in the place where I have landed. And again, I think for me, what makes it right is that I have not had to make any kind of jumps or excuses that I've had to make in the past, where I've had to say, oh, well, maybe this was culture, or maybe this was history, or maybe this is the way that it was written, or maybe it wasn't God's time, or maybe I wasn't this. Like there were a lot of maybes that I was throwing around that I no longer have to throw around, not having that belief system anymore.
Amazing. In terms of just heading towards a wrap up, I did want to ask a couple of final things. The first one was your poetry seems like it's just touching a lot of people. And I'll ask a question or two after you do this, but I'd love to hear some of your poetry. I know there's everyone can go. I'd encourage everyone to go to Facebook and check out your page and see what you're doing. But is there one that comes to mind that you feel like you'd be willing to share with us and read for us, and add the nuance of your voice and so forth, just so we could hear a little bit of it?
Yeah, I just recently wrote one that I think a lot of people have been responding to because it's a shared experience that a lot of people who have had. So I wrote this last week, but this is called Domestic Mission Trip. When I was 14 or maybe 15, I knocked on a man's door and asked if he knew Jesus. My voice shook with all the weight of expectations held by our summer youth interns, the way expectations can feel when a girl of 14 or maybe 15 hears praise from a college aged boy named Matthew, holding all the power and authority and Cool Ranch Doritos. The man scoffed, the way only scoffing can be done when a 14-year-old white girl asks a 60-year-old black man a question about theology, as if she understands the world or space she or he occupies. The man was clear, if not kind, that I was very wrong for all the reasons I wouldn't understand until 20 years later, but it sure felt right when Matt shared his chips with me. And I wonder now if our definition of grooming is too narrow because the church buys and sells children all the time. We just don't realize it until 20 years later.
Powerful stuff. In terms of your story, a lot of the people that I talk to, one of the major themes that comes up a lot, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is just there's so much to unpack, so many roots. Even once you know that you don't believe this or that anymore, you're like, but the roots are still there. Things such as people would know that there's no such real thing as being ashamed of your sexual desires, but they still feel ashamed for some reason. It just those roots are so deep, and the idea that they should be feeling guilty all the time, or that they need to earn their keep. You have to do enough good deeds to stay out of the bad, off the bad list. When you look at your healing, what are some of the things that you still feel like, wow, those roots were so deep that they're going to take a while to just truly, truly unpack? And for the big picture of all of it, where did you like? How do you start, and how do you? What has been the some of the best parts of healing that's brought you to a point where you're just like, I'm free. I'm free.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I still feel this was 30 plus years of a very entrenched belief system. And so I still don't know if I have even touched in my healing and in my changing. I don't even know if I've touched a lot of it. I wore spaghetti straps the other day. I am 36 years old. That should be okay for me to do, but I still felt very uncomfortable with my body, uncomfortable with the choice, trying to find a way to cover myself because that was so ingrained, like that modesty, that purity culture was still ingrained in me. There are times when even the things that I write, I have to like go and step away from them and then come back to them because I'm worried that, oh, if I put that out there like that's very a heretic would say that, that's very blasphemous, and what is going to happen to me if I put that out there, just existentially. And I think there are times where I find myself like thinking about you know "Ooh, what if I was wrong?" I mean, because that's what they teach you, right? That is the one thing you don't want to be wrong on. Because if you're wrong on that's your eternity, buddy. And you don't want to be wrong on that because if you're wrong on that, like you don't get a second chance. And so there are times where I like find myself cringing or like wanting to apologize. I don't even know who to, but like thinking like, oh, I'm sorry. And then like, oh, who was I talking to? I find myself doing that sometimes with like just praying too. Even though I don't believe it, like the habit was instilled in me, the relationship with that imaginary friend was still there. And so I find myself every now and then going, oh God, like what do you think about that? And then go like, oh gosh, that's not that that doesn't exist. That's not there. And so there are times where I still feel like, that phantom limb syndrome almost of like, but that phantom relationship syndrome with God. And I am still thinking, it really hits anytime that I am doing anything around my daughter, because I think that there's such an instilled, like, is my responsibility as the mom to raise her up the way she should go, and what does that mean, and what has that looked like for her? And so there's a lot of unpacking that I've had to do with that. So I would say that those echoes and those ghosts are still there, and I have a feeling that they will be with me for a very long time. And I think it's just getting to the place where I'm comfortable living beside them, and gently interrogating each one until the echoes aren't as loud anymore. And that has been the thing that I have found most helpful for me, like in my healing journey, is I'm no longer there is no longer like a time limit. There is no longer like a goal set. I think that when I was running the race, as a Christian, I had that goal line. I couldn't get off the straight and narrow. There was a path and I was supposed to take it. I think now I'm just spending a lot of time breathing and a lot of time realizing that there isn't a there isn't a goal. And I think for some people that would make them anxious. And for me, I'm a very anxious person. And so I think I've grappled with that anxiety a little bit, but it's very freeing to say, I am just going to take day to day, just right now, tomorrow, on Monday, I am going to do this, and this is how I'm going to live my life. And
Hmm.
whatever happens in the future, it happens. And I have come to that is sort of where my healing has kind of landed. I don't know things. I'm not the smartest person in the room by any means. I'm not going to uncover all of the answers to life's mysteries. I am not going to be here, um unraveling the right theology or the right way of living or the right way of existing, or what happens after death. Where does our consciousness go, or what are the secrets of the universe? I don't know those. I'm fine with that, like, because I've got a kid to focus on, and I've got me to focus on, and hey, our days are full of stuff anyway. And at the end of the day, like, that to me has been the most fulfilling. My life is full as is. And there is no point in worrying about the future. And I think I I know that there are Christians who will look at that and hear that and say, and that's where Satan gets you, and that's where you're going to be tempted, and that's exactly the kind of person who's just going to go and you know pillage and murder and all of that, because you no longer have the boundaries. But I want to say, we shouldn't need boundaries to be good people. We shouldn't need boundaries to want to make the world better. And honestly, it has been just incredibly freeing and healing to know I don't have to manage God and his baggage. I don't have to manage the church and their baggage. I don't have to manage other Christians and their baggage. All I have to do is just sit and live and teach my daughter to hold every single person in in her heart, with respect and love, and move forward there.
Mm,
And I don't need I don't need the rest of that noise. It's not important.
mm.
Um
Love it.
and it's not as scary. I don't worry as much. The anxiety isn't there. So
On the note of the word scary, would you say that this this statement would be true of you, that you feel safer in your own skin on this side of deconversion?
100% yes. Um Despite how many people are sending me messages or commenting the things that they comment on the stuff that I write, I have never felt safer in my skin than I do today, because I am not performing for anyone. I don't have to I don't have to make myself into a certain person or trim off the places that are offending people. Um, I don't have to, under the guise of community and under the guise of unity, I don't have to keep silencing myself. I can be who I'm going to be, and I can present that and say, this is who I am. Now you all can move with me, you can move against me, but like it's not going to move me, you know. You know what I mean? Like, and that has been something that has been just really really freeing. So I would say to people who are like nervous about exploring more of, you know, the questions or the doubts that they have, um if you're worried because the narrative has been that atheists are horribly bitter, angry, awful people who are just live horrible lives, that is not the case. That is a scare tactic. That is absolutely a scare tactic. And you can sit and believe what you want, but also just from like a social work perspective and from a trauma informed perspective, I will say that I've never been healthier than being out of Christianity and um, being an atheist. And I think that that has not impacted or impeded my love for the world or my love for people, and that has not impacted my morality and the values that I hold and the way that I think the world needs to be run. Really, what it has done is just opened myself up for a lot more truth and a lot more peace.
Mm, well said. I love how you started to by pointing out the idea of you not performing. And I say this tongue in cheek, of course, but like you're especially not performing for an invisible ancient Canaanite demigod. But it's like, you know, that performance part of it is so, like, when you realize that this, so much of what we're doing in Christianity is based on the societal pressures that we have. Like, this is a way of creating a norm and saying you have a, you know, there's a bell curve and you need to fit somewhere in the middle, and the middle is this list of beliefs and this list of, this is how you should look and this is how you should talk. And that, yes, there's this theological platform that gets woven into it, but in many ways it's just about pleasing people.
Right.
And I've even had people admit, like, in previous conversations where they've said something like, I think a lot of my Christianity was just, it was, as a kid, I wanted to please my parents. I wanted somebody to say, good job, Johnny. And I just want God to be this God that's just saying, good job, Johnny. And it's like, you're stuck in this rut of, I just want someone to praise me. And when you realize, number one, of course, that God isn't real, but just that your life isn't stuck in this performance mode. And you I think you get to be, in my opinion, you're able to be more present and life is no longer up ahead. It isn't like, well, I'm performing because I want to have a crown in heaven. I want to have jewels in heaven.
Right.
I want to have, well done, my good and faithful servant said to me. You're able to be like, no, I'm not storing up my treasures in heaven. My life is right now, and I don't even know how
Right.
much more I've got. Like, be present.
Right.
And I love that you point out that idea, because performance is, I think, such a big part of this. You did mention, you took my thunder away. You were talking about someone that was thinking about this stuff. My question was going to be, maybe if you have anything else to add to what you just said. Someone that's in the tailspin phase, where you certainly seem like you're at a point where you're very grounded. I know I feel very grounded. I've had more peace since being in. I tell people I had more peace in the first hour of deconversion than I've had, in 40 years
Yeah.
as a Christian. But I'm almost 4 years removed from that point. But if someone is in that tailspin where they're like, number one, I don't know what to think, but number two, if I keep thinking these thoughts, people are going to really hate me. You mentioned the word apostate, but or heretic, for some people, apostate and heretic are very real concerns. Could you say a word or two just to anybody that's in that spot where they're just like, this feels like this is darkness, and it feels like it's going to get a lot darker, and it's probably never going to get bright again?
Yeah. I I think the first thing is just acknowledging that that is a very valid feeling and valid emotion, that and I will say that I think I know, at least in my background, and I think a lot of people who grew up in the Christian background, we were not validated. Our feelings and emotions were not validated, and especially if they were bad, and especially if they were negative, a lot of times they were just told to like push it down. um it takes courage. It takes a lot of courage, but I think my encouragement, as we're standing kind of on the sidelines seeing people like run the same sort of race, if I'm going to use the race metaphor, I'm going to steal from Paul and use it for my metaphor, that there is a community at the other side. There is light at the other side, and there is a community at the other side. The amount of people who have come to me after I have like said the things that I have said and started sharing my writing and started talking about my journey, the amount of messages that I get and the community that I have, it feels so authentic and so kind and so welcoming. It is, you think about what you wanted in church, the community that church was supposed to give you, and just multiply that by a million, and that authentic sense of self. People are happy when you get that, and you don't get that in church a lot of times. People are not happy when you are authentic in church. But when you are out of it, you find people who are really glad that you were on this journey. And I think you are going to find your people, and they may not be the people that you started with, and they may not be the people that you had expected to find, but you will find people. Because I think like finds like. I think when you share that trauma, if you have trauma around that and you share that trauma, you are going to find people who have been there and gotten through it and are going through it and are able to guide you. And so it's just really starting and moving, and then find those spaces. And wherever those spaces are, I found a lot of strength online, like just from people messaging or like groups that we've done. But there are places and spaces, you start talking about this, you're going to get people coming alongside you, hearing you out, and encouraging you in this. And then I am going to say, and this is just the social worker in me, always make sure you're safe. We have always, it is a very important rule in any kind of trauma informed care, that you never remove anything until you have something to replace it. And so always make sure that you have some sort of safety net and that you are being safe. But there are people who are there, and there are people who can catch you and make sure that you are walking through this. If anything, you have two people right here who have gone through it, and who are going through it and are able to speak to that experience. So I think like my long term, my hope would be, there are so many people that unfortunately are who no longer want to be in the same circle that I'm in, who we used to be close, but we are no longer in the same circle. I have found people who have decided to enter my circle as I am, and that kind of love is powerful. Because it does feel authentic, and it is a love for who I am and not what I could bring them as the Christian, woman.
I love it. I just want to echo that. I think it's great advice, because so many of us do feel like, who are my people now? And for a lot of us, it should even start as simple as, you need a good secular therapist. But as you go past the initial phases of like, just the horror of it all, you do begin to get grounded, and you start to create roots, and just being able to branch out and find community, whether it's Facebook or hopefully some people in real life. But there's so many of us that care. And honestly, I'm just speaking for myself here, but I've met a lot of really wonderful deconverted people that truly care. Like they don't just care about social justice and other things where it's very easy to just make a vote and say I did it, but they really are willing to personally get in people's lives and say, I'll help you specifically. It's been amazing to me. It's in some ways it's crazy, because you compare it and contrast it to your life in Christianity, and you're like, some of this community wasn't really community. It was just people just trying to have a facade. I'm a good person. I had a good week. Here's my smile. But the whole shiny, happy people kind of stuff. Well, I know I've kept you for a while. I did want to ask just one quick last question, and I'll let you go.
Sure.
You are obviously a very creative person, which I try myself to be somewhat like that. So I'm impressed. I love it. But the next question in my mind is always is for me, that I always ask, and I'm going to ask it to you, is what's next? What else is on the table? What is your creativity about to unleash?
Oh man, I don't know. I will say I joke about this all the time on my page, because it became such an inside joke about my next book title will be or whatever your insult is about me. But I would love to keep writing. I mean, really, that is where my passion is. So anytime that I can just keep writing, whether that's going to be on Facebook or somewhere else. Facebook keeps kicking me off too, so I might have to find somewhere else to do it. But
do you aspire to publish any of it?
Do what?
Do you aspire to publish any of it?
I would like to. Yeah, I would absolutely like to. So I think I think that would take a lot of brain power. And I also work full time, and I am a mom, and I do write. But yeah, I would love to publish. I think that would just be so much fun. So
well, I know I'm speaking for a lot of people that would say we would cheer on whatever you do at this point. So it's good stuff. Please keep it coming. Well, I'll just wrap up by saying, Kaitlin, thank you so much. This has been great to hear your story. I know we could probably dig into a lot of little subtopics along the way, but just to, for a first run at this has been awesome to hear your story. I really appreciate your vulnerability and appreciate how much you do for the community.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, we've been speaking with Kaitlin Shetler. Again, the links for her work will be beneath our video. Please go like and subscribe and all that. And Kaitlin, thanks again. We love your story. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye.